Good afternoon. We're going to be getting started in 1 minute. Thank you for joining us if you're online. We encourage you to make use of the chat function in Ustream. We will be monitoring that, and we will do our best to take some of the questions from those of you who aren't able to join us here in person. So please make use of the chat, and we will try to bring you into the room and into the sunny weather here in Miami, Florida. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Communities for Just Schools Fund and our webinar series, Friends and Colleagues, the SHOT Foundation, welcome to Reproductive Justice is Restorative Justice, expanding the school discipline frame and organizing at the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. We are live from Miami's Little Haiti Cultural Center, and we are honored to be joined by our local partners and friends, Dream Defenders, Power U, and Soul Sisters Leadership Collective. These three groups are doing amazing, amazing organizing work here in South Florida, across the state of Florida, and as we saw this past weekend, across the nation and the world, building solidarity across race, gender, and sexuality to model what effective youth and young adult-led organizing looks and feels like. They are modeling every day what it takes to build a movement towards the schools that all children deserve. Schools in which young people of color, LGBTQ youth, gender nonconforming youth are prepared to succeed and to thrive in school, in career, and in life. We know that when schools are welcoming, nurturing, and affirming places, safe places for all students, where they have a deep sense of belonging and purpose, where they are challenged to grow, that our communities are stronger and our future is limitless. I am Jamie Coppell, the Deputy Director for Strategic Partnerships at the Communities for Just Schools Fund. And I'm joined today by my amazing colleague, Thina Robinson-Mock, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Before I hand it over to Thina, I just want to tell you a little bit about what brings us together. Those of us who care deeply about public education, we see the transformational potential of a quality education. We know that a quality education alone will not eliminate deeply entrenched social barriers like racism and poverty, but it is a critical tool to unlock some of the doors of opportunity that have been denied opening for too many young people in this country for much too long. The Communities for Just Schools Fund makes grants to groups that organize young people, parents, educators, caregivers, and other community members to advocate on behalf of and alongside students who are disproportionately impacted by the overuse of exclusionary discipline practices. There are far too many students who find themselves being policed and targeted for exclusion from their schools because of flawed school policies and practices, and because of flawed perceptions of who they are and who their communities are. Our partners who sit before you today are organizing community members to stand up for positive, healthy, and supportive school environments that produce better academic and social outcomes for all students. We we oppose the hardening of schools. We oppose heavy police presence, zero-tolerance school discipline policies, and over-reliance on exclusionary discipline methods. At the Communities for a Just Schools Fund, a national donor collaborative, we bring together the resources of philanthropy with the power of grassroots organizing. We do this to ensure that all schools welcome students and nurture their full potential. To make a difference, we do 4 things. We fund organizations that change schools and the system of education through community organizing. Through the very way in which they organize, they are teaching and modeling critical thinking and thoughtful debate. They are filling what is all too often a deep void in schools around culturally relevant pedagogy and a deep understanding of the impacts of historically entrenched racism. We are working with our partners to support them in building and maintaining the skills they need and want to be effective leaders. And we connect. We are dot connectors. We host events like this one today to ensure that the doors between the often well-intentioned silos are thrown open, and that we all have the space to be in authentic relationships with each other as we seek to ensure that our children's genius is seen and valued. And we lead with love. We lead alongside our 50 community partners working across 28 states. We lead with support from our amazing donor members, many of whom are in the room with us today, and we thank them for their support. We thank the members of the Black Girls Matter Miami Coalition and Dr. Monique Morris and Wakumi Douglas for the theater piece and talkback that we all here in the room just had the opportunity to experience. We thank our members and our partners for your ongoing support and collaboration, for the deep and meaningful relationships that we value with each of you. And we thank everyone here in the audience and online who has joined us today. We encourage you to participate alongside us in the conversation online. Help us amplify our messages in this moment where we need to define for ourselves what safety looks like and feels like in every way, in every community. Use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we will see you there. And please know there will be time for questions, and we welcome them, and we look forward to the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to look to see if Alexis has joined us. Alexis from Dream Defenders is going to start us off, there she is, with a piece of poetry, because the arts are one of the ways we will find liberation.
Hi, everybody. I'm awkward with mics without a stand, so okay. There's no stand. A stand is fine. So yeah, I'll just stand here then. My mother told me we sing freedom songs to lullaby our cries, soothing our broken hearts and the realities of our existence. I'm 24 years old. I sit centered in a park, breeze hugging my skin. I stare into the eyes of freedom. Bronze skin, direct lineage of Jesus herself. Amongst the mundane acts of adults, she dances and ruptures the leaves beneath her feet. Her world is one of endless possibilities. Her world knows no tales of her weaponized body. This is the genesis of freedom, before we were forced into the political identities of our bodies. I'm 7 years old, sitting at a desk playing He Loves Me Not with my pencils. He looks at me and asks me, do you like me? My mind begs my lips to say yes, but in the moment of silence, he says, it doesn't matter. You're too dark for me anyways. Walking home that day, the birds no longer sang a tune, they wept. I'm 11 years old. I stare at my mother's veins enwrapped in my palms, leading me to my classroom. I sat in a class of students in which I don't see my face in, an audience of loud whiteness and the whisper of my existence. You're so black. Why are you so black? Why do you talk like that? I became mute. I'm 12 years old. In bed, I lay my head next to an author doll gifted to me by my grandfather. Soaked with tears, I release shame. Shame turns to anger as the doll transforms into my grandfather. I look up and cry to his angel, rid me of this sin. I sobbed louder, waiting to hear the footsteps of my mother or father. They never came. I had a dream that night that my grandfather smiling as if to say it's okay. I'm 13. A group of girls pushed me and taunted me about my blackness. Ew, you're so ugly. A source of what began to be the first signs of my mental illness, having silent anxiety attacks while walking through large crowds at school. I wrote my first suicide note that night. I'm 18. I stare into the eyes of trauma guised as love. Love is not supposed to hurt. Love is supposed to hurt, I tell myself. I modeled love after what was around me. Memories of my mother and father arguing, flashbacks to my father holding a gun to his head. I can't live without you. It hurts too much. I stare into the eyes of trauma and he tells me, please, I'll kill myself if you leave. Pick up. I've called to say goodbye. In the same breath saying, you disgust me, no one will love you like I did. I stare into the eyes of Black women in my lineage. I only know from photos. Others I know by names. Others I know from the trauma I've inherited. Come celebrate with us that every day something has tried to kill us and has failed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That was beautiful. Come celebrate with us. I love that. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thea Robinson-Mock with Communities for Just Schools Fund, and really excited to be with you today and excited to have this conversation. We're streaming to you live from Little Haiti Cultural Center in Miami. The weather is great. For those of you on the Northeast, I'm sorry. But we are thrilled to be here. This week, Communities for Just Schools Fund has been in powerful dialogue with our Florida partners, Soul Sisters Leadership Collective, Dream Defenders, and Power Youth Center for Social Change. And we've been talking about education justice, our dreams, our visions for that. We've been talking about Parkland. We've been talking about the significance of this political moment. And we are all feeling very full about this, and we know that after this conversation this afternoon, you will be too. I just want to open us up briefly with a quick quote from Audre Lorde, who once said, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." Our work for education justice is not a single issue struggle. And we know that because if you are a Black girl or a transgender girl or gender nonconforming young person growing up in Florida, or any place in the United States, you face multiple layers of violence and oppression the moment you step foot inside a school. And that violence is reflected in the curriculum that's taught, the policies that punish and fail to protect them, the adults in the school building who simply do not see them and their brilliance. And so we're inviting you to join us for a brave space today. And we're creating also a call to action for philanthropy, for our community, for concerned folks, to join us as we examine school discipline, climate, and push out at the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. Because when we do this, we are able to address the full needs of students in schools who are most marginalized. And we're calling on you to support that work. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about reproductive justice as restorative justice. And that framework invites us to consider the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, political, economic, social well-being of women and girls and their ability to make healthy decisions about their bodies and their sexuality. And it invites us to make our schools the kinds of welcoming places where Black girls, femmes, transgender, and gender nonconforming youth can thrive. And so with that, I'm going to first invite our panelists to introduce themselves and your organizations, and then we'll launch into our questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ruth S.O.U.L. I am a mother, spiritual counselor, healer, writer, all of the above, right? Like when the young people were like, Black women are like infinite, that's what I consider myself to be. Right now, I am working on a project called Femme Sage, which in Creole means midwife or midwifery, which is really what I see myself as, right? And building an organization to thinking about what are the ways that we're nurturing, building, and communing our community, because when we think about midwives, we're thinking about the person that catches a baby, right? But in our communities, the role of midwives and midwifery is much more than that, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what that feels like in a little bit, but just leaving out this thank you for hosting this, thank you for everybody who's here, and for folks who are online streaming. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Sorry, I just can't hear myself with this mic. My name is Rachel Gilmer, and I'm an organizer with the Dream Defenders, and also very grateful to be a part of the conversation today.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Lopez. I'm the executive director at Power U Center for Social Change in Miami, and really grateful to be here as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Daley. I'm the Reproductive Justice organizer at Power U Center for Social Change, and I'm excited to get into this conversation.
Peace, everyone. Yeah, I'm having a similar experience. Can I be heard? Yeah, okay. My name is Wakumi Douglas. I'm the co-founder and executive director of S.O.U.L Sisters Leadership Collective, and like everyone, sitting with a lot of gratitude and excitement for the conversation.
Hi, my name is Mason Sarah Vincent. Please call me Mason. I am a youth at S.O.U.L Sisters Leadership Collective. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to first turn to you, Ruth. And prior to your current work, you were a lead organizer at Power U. And you were at the organization at an instrumental time when the framework began to really shape around reproductive justice and the political analysis and understanding that young people were able to gain around that happened during your time there. And so I'm wondering if you can just share with us a little bit about, give us some background of how youth came to that sort of understanding and how that framework was really important for your work here in Miami-Dade County.
Thank you. So power. All right. You know, we like chanters and like organizers, so we always got to add that in. So Power U is a grassroots organization that I had the honor and just like privilege to be able to organize with a dope group of young people who consistently show up for themselves and show up for their communities. And around the time that, first off, right, Trayvon Martin is shot and killed and murdered by George Zimmerman, right? Power U, Dream Defenders, and a host of organizations take over, right? They're going to be talking more about like what that takeover looked and felt like. And that was kind of like the pivotal point of, I would say, of like when we started thinking about reproductive justice and restorative justice, in utilizing them together. So the reason why was because after that happened, President Obama came out with the My Brother's Keepers initiative and basically said that he was going to implement and fund and resource organizations and people who are doing mentorship with young men, which is good, which is very important. And at the same time that was happening, young people at Power U were really like, well, what about the girls, right? Like, what about the gender nonconforming youth? And in fact, if we start thinking about the work that we do as, like, we center Black girls and gender nonconforming youth, actually we'll be able to address all the issues that all the genders are facing, right? And I think the reason why we were able to, the organization was able to do that was because for years, Power U had been doing the Powerful Women and Families work, doing breastfeeding campaigns, doing circles with mothers, and basically providing that basic need and supporting to making sure that the organizing was always centered around reproductive justice, right? But we just never used that frame. So we showed up to the Alliance for Education Justice, was having a convening in Miami at the time. And we show up and I was like, hey, are we talking about this as a reproductive justice issue? People looked at me like, what's that? Seriously, like, it was like, we're in an education justice space and people were like, okay, what's reproductive justice? So that was another opportunity to share. And then we went to a sister song convening when Marissa Alexander was coming, she's free now, but she was being attacked, right, by the court system and being criminalized for defending herself. And we went there, we were marching, we were protesting, and we were like, well, the issue that Marissa is facing, girls face them in Miami all the time, right? And we're looking at it as an education justice issue, right? So it became an opportunity there to talk about education justice. So when we came back and My Brother's Keeper came around, or one thing I know about organizing with young people is that you create the space, they'll talk. As long as adults we listen, we can easily organize, right? That, like, the things that they see needs to be changed, or the framework or whatever, that they already experience it enough to basically be like, all right, I see this, now how do we move forward? And that was the opportunity that we had, was to be able to talk to folks, to be able to have listening sessions, to basically talk about it in a way that was different, right? To talk about reproductive justice as, of course, we want to be able to raise our families the way that we want to, right? In safe and healthier schools and communities. We want to raise them, we want to be able to birth them in hospitals and wherever, right? Like, wherever we want to be able to birth them. But it was really the raising families in safe and healthier schools and communities that really stuck to Power U, was that that was a part of the framework that we were like, okay, this is where we're gonna stick to. So shortly after that, it was Freedom Summer, Jackson, Mississippi. The Black girls at Power U, like, we were going to create a workshop called I Am My Sisters Too, which really kind of dived into unpacking the My Brother's Keepers initiative and really looking at ways that other groups across the country could think about what are the ways that we as organizers could start making sure that Black girls are centered in the conversation around school to prison pipeline. And luckily for us, I think for, like, funders were also like, ooh, what's this about? There were opportunities like researchers. Monique was already, like, doing, like, a bunch of research around the West Coast, so we were able to kind of, like, tap in to what was happening, and then just making sure that the organizing that we're doing focused on a lot of that. So it really started from there, just like doing that workshop, doing that training, and then forming or being part of the Black Girls Matter Coalition, which is the work that's continuing, right? But it also gives us an opportunity to think about restorative justice, utilizing circles, utilizing circle keeping as the opportunity to create reproductive justice, right? That is the tool that we would use to say, okay, we don't want police in our schools, we want more counselors, and we want restorative justice, and that all of that would be a reshaping of the culture of the school, which would then be like what reproductive justice looks like in schools. And so I think for since then, everything evolves, right? I think with growing leadership and new youth and opportunities and organizations coming in, things kind of evolve. But I think it's very natural and really important that we continue to do that, and to continue to see, okay, where did it start? How do we keep it moving? And how do we support the work that's continuously happening across Miami-Dade and across the state and country?
Thank you so much, Ruth. Rachel, I'm going to come to you. And Ruth, you mentioned working together with Dream Defenders, and we know that one of the most powerful things about the work here in South Florida is the beautiful ways in which groups work together collaboratively around these issues. And so, Rachel, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, one, give us a little bit more insight into the Dream Defenders' early work and how your organization came about, and how you all have worked together in coalition spaces with the other organizations on our panel.
Great. So as Ruth said, Dream Defenders was founded in 2012 after the tragic killing of Trayvon Martin. Young people came together across the state and led a big march from Bethune-Cookman University to the Sanford Police Department. And after George Zimmerman was acquitted on the grounds of the Stand Your Ground law, young people from across the state came over and took over the Florida Capitol for 31 days and 30 nights, demanding the passing of what we called Trayvon's Law, which was a law that talked about the school-to-prison pipeline, racial profiling, and stand your ground. And I think in this moment, at the end when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, because the law wasn't moving and this special session wasn't called around the law, it was wild, because we had been sort of surged into this sort of movement moment where a lot of people, we were on TV and we were, a lot of celebrities were reaching out. So we'd sort of gained popularity and mass support, but we still hadn't, the law hadn't passed. So we realized we actually hadn't built power in order to actually shift the laws. That we'd maybe gained popularity and support in one way, but that hadn't translated to actually being able to move an agenda in the state. And so we went back to different parts of the state and really realized we need to build a vibrant youth movement in Florida. We need to grow our movement massively, and we need to work with the other organizations in Florida, Soul Sisters Leadership Collective, Power You, to do so. So I think in this moment, when we're in kind of another movement moment where young people have taken tragedy and turned it into this opportunity to fight back and to not just let the tragedy happen and just let it happen, but to say, hey, this should never have happened in the first place. We're seeing another moment when young people are on the cover of Time magazine, and there's this, again, moment where these young people have gained a lot of popularity. And I think what we feel is that we want to work with those people, with the young people who have been newly politicized in this moment. 1 in 3 young people participated in a march on Saturday, to really help them understand what it means to build political power, and to really figure out how we build a cross-race, cross-class united front here in Florida in order to really, really, really change the course of the state. And I think part of that is going to be figuring out how we ensure that the media doesn't let this conversation only be about mass shootings, but that, one, we use mass shootings as a jumping off point to talk about gun violence in Black communities and violence as a whole in Black communities. We can't have a conversation about gun violence and not talk about Black women and girls. Mm-hmm. The number 1 cause of death for Black women is violence at the hands of a partner. The majority of young Black girls are sexually assaulted before they turn the age of 18. So if we're going to have a conversation about gun violence, we have to center Black women and girls. And Black youth need to be at the forefront of this conversation around solutions as well, because we know that what we've seen since Columbine is that the solution to mass shootings has been more police in Black and brown schools. And that, 1, that hasn't stopped mass shootings, and that 2, it's led to the criminalization of our young people. So this moment needs to be about how we actually talk about real solutions like restorative justice, like transformative justice, how we really come up with alternatives. And when we think about restorative justice on a really fundamental level, it's about rebuilding community. And I think when we think about even mass shootings themselves and them just, people becoming increasingly alienated in our society, restorative justice is about fighting back against that alienation, but really, really building community in a world that is becoming increasingly divided. And so we need Black and brown people at the forefront of this conversation so that we can really develop solutions that aren't going to lead to criminalization and actually going to rebuild the fabric of our society. I think the other piece, just where I'll close, is that we also need to use gun violence as a jumping off point to talk about all the ways young people are unprotected, including the fact that DACA is on the line right now. All the things that mothers are up against in terms of being able to raise their children, poverty, mass incarceration. And I think, we're having this, it's been so amazing and inspiring to see young people say, hey, politicians care more about a relationship with the NRA than they do about the lives of young people. But I think we need to expand that conversation to say it's not just the NRA, it's also GEO Group, one of the largest private prison companies. It's also the fact that Florida is home to one of the largest for-profit charter companies that worked with the legislature to pass a law that's going to lead to all of the public schools in Florida moving to charter over the next few years. It's the fact that, Disney World fought a $15 minimum wage increase in Orlando. And so I think we really have to expand this conversation around the corporate rule over Florida and how that's leading to a future of Florida where young people's lives are not prioritized at every turn and politicians are completely in bed with folks who all they care about is amassing more and more wealth. And so really, we're really excited about this moment, excited about the opportunities to bring more and more young people into our movement. We were a part of a student walkout in Broward County where Parkland, where Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is located, and it was they organized 500 plus of their peers, predominantly Black students who walked 15 miles, 9+ hours to deliver demands to the school board. And so we're really excited about all of the young people who are being brought into the movement in this moment, and excited for what that means in terms of us being able to build a strong youth movement to build the political power needed to really shift the course of this state.
Thank you, Rachel. James, we're going to come to you, and building on some of what Ruth said about Power U's work. We know that Power U Center for Social Change has been working and organizing to end the school-to-prison pipeline for over a decade. Some major successes have happened with that work. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about the work around suspensions, restorative practices, and some of the ways that you all are exploring building political power here in South Florida.
So first off, I just want to ask us to think about the role that schools play in our society, and I think it gives a case for why most of our work has moved the way it has around reproductive justice. And I think the one thing that I want to name is this piece around the ability to raise children in a safe and healthy environment cannot happen in this current society if there is no control of that community, and if there is no control of those conditions. And related to that, and just the name, like the elephant in the room as being the only straight cis man on this panel, the role of centering Black women is super important to that. But the current economic system has it so education trains young people not to become better human beings, but for them to fit in the economy in a particular way. And based off of what school you go to, that's the sector of the economy that you'll stay in, right, in terms of reproducing that. And if that is one of the main functions of education, then we have to see the role that gender plays in that. And the reality is that in the current society that we live in the current economic system, men have been underdeveloped to see labor in a particular way that allows them to have a particular set of jobs. Right? So what you have is a society that doesn't have strong emotional intelligence. So us at Power U, our #1 priority is to develop the leadership of young Black and brown working class youth and Black women so that they may lead struggles. And we believe in order for you to lead in a real way, you have to be able to know how to govern. And in order to be able to know how to govern, you have to have the space to have emotional intelligence, which obviously means that the school-to-prison pipeline has to be dismantled within that. So for the past several years, almost a decade, Power U has been trying to implement or pushing to implement restorative justice and restorative practices as a policy within Miami-Dade public schools. And what we've organized for a long time, developing young people on how to actually do restorative justice, giving them the space to actually practice. They've sat in on several school board meetings, had several conversations with elected officials. To then in 2015, we saw the superintendent on national television say that he was going to end out-of-school suspensions, which we saw as a great opportunity. But ultimately, organizations like us, organizations like Soul Sisters that actually do the training, actually have roots to the community, were cut out of that implementation process. So it made us rethink what is our job as an organization that we say we're developing young people. What are we doing to actually build a long-term plan to get there? And that ultimately means building power. And we felt building power through broadly thinking about how can we use civic engagement as a way to not only challenge elected officials and hold them accountable to what we want in the society, but to also prepare young people to lead and govern, to know what civic engagement is, so they can actually be in those positions in the future. And I think that's super exciting that in the moment of Parkland, one thing that is very clear is that the next steps for the young people who are in that movement are talking about GOTV, talking about registering folks to vote, the role of being an active participant in our society. And to be a good citizen, meaning you have to get civically engaged. And that's great. We fundamentally believe that. But for us, civic engagement means so much more when you think about the real principles of reproductive justice. And for us, we see our civic engagement program as a space for young people to be able to actually learn how to interact with individuals who've had a fundamentally different life than they've had. And I think I feel super grateful and blessed to just see the panel before, the young Black girls before here, who kind of spoke to the strength and the emotional intelligence they already have at such a young age, understanding that people are solely shaped by the conditions that they grow up in, and that we have to be able to communicate with other individuals in order to get things done. And I think, just to bring it back to the 2016 election, folks who, regardless of how folks felt, regardless of their political orientation, I think a lot of people were surprised, and then a lot of people realized that, we actually don't talk to a lot of people who don't necessarily live our experience, who don't really agree with us. And that's actually not an easy thing, but it's actually a skill that has to be practiced and built. And I think the panel before here also gave testimony that students in schools right now are being trained to only interact with students that have similar interests, right? If you're a gifted student, you only talk with the gifted students, right? Wherever course, if you're with the ninth graders, you only talk with the ninth graders, right? And that doesn't, right, that's a lesson, that's a practice that they learn, that they take when they become adults, right? I mean, even now, people barely talk to their neighbors, right? And then, I don't know about y'all, but I have a very difficult time talking to my own family about, politics, right? And about what my experience is and how it's fundamentally different for them. And for us, we think a civic engagement program is all the important things around elections, but it really is, can we actually train young people who understand systemic oppression to actually go out into the communities that they live in themselves and organize their own community members and also their parents around just a dramatically different society and a dramatically different orientation. And of course, that's going to fall into the realm of reproductive justice as well when you think about access to contraception, bodily autonomy, and things of that nature. And with that is also challenging the current society that only allows certain conversations to be had based off of certain genders. And I think we're super excited about the possibility of developing a new group of young people who are pushing to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline, but actually are able to, what we say in the restorative justice piece around building community, that means having the emotional intelligence to maybe have those conversations with loved ones and community members that have caused harm, to actually build that beloved community that can actually have power to actually govern, to change the economic system that doesn't allow us to do that right now.
Thank you, James. And I'm going to keep going down the row here and turn it to Samantha. So Samantha, talk to us a little bit about some of the work that Power U is doing around training young leaders and advocating around comprehensive sex education in schools, some of the birth justice work, and also work with young parents.
So as Ruth has mentioned before, we are a reproductive justice organization, and we're currently in a coalition with Miami Worker Center and New Florida Majority, really seeing that it's crucial that comprehensive sex ed is in every public school in Miami-Dade County. It's something that has come up many times before when Broward got comprehensive sex education passed, with Miami-Dade being the 4th largest district in the country and being #1 for new HIV cases. It's needed, right? So in this coalition, there was a survey given to current Miami-Dade students, and the survey was basically discussing their current experiences with sex education, how they felt about it, what they feel like they needed moving forward, and overwhelmingly the results were that young people wanted more sex education. They wanted more sex education, for it to be more comprehensive, for it to be over a longer period of time and not just a one and done, not just say, for an example, TOP program is here and a lot of our youth go through it in 9th grade and then are never really exposed to it again. So young people wanted to learn about LGBTQ rights, right? They wanted to learn about gender identity, gender roles. They wanted to learn about consent. Consent is something that's come up and always does, right? And especially in Miami-Dade, there's been a lot of sexual assault that's happened. Some of it has been publicized, some of it isn't really discussed, but it's definitely there, it's present, and we need to have a conversation on consent. So young people said they wanted to learn about all these things. And we did this survey with students, undergrad students, and they kind of crafted the results in infographics, which we released to the school board. We did a press conference in front of the school board and allowed people to speak on their experiences, allowed young people to speak on their experiences, why they believe comprehensive sex education is important and crucial. And then myself, another person from Power U kind of discussed that with the school board, and overall, there was crickets. Nobody had any responses, they just looked at us blankly, kind of with scowls. They heard comprehensive sex ed and looked like they just shut down. So that just fueled us even more. We're fighting for a comprehensive sex education that is age appropriate, K through 12, right? And not the first experience being in high school, medically accurate, and something that, regardless of any person's personal beliefs, it's given to each student the same, everyone's getting the same information, evidence-based, and youth are able to be informed to make decisions for themselves and their bodies. What that looks like for us now is having a core youth group of comprehensive sex ed champions that are able to discuss comprehensive sex education, why they need it, why they want it. Moving into April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, really having our youth be able to speak, give their testimonies, their real examples on comprehensive sex education, their sex education, what they wish they would have had. And overwhelmingly also in the results was that they did not want to learn more about abstinence. Abstinence is something that's been force-fed to them, and the last thing we want to know is more abstinence, right? So really taking that work and moving forward with it, centering our young people so they can be their own champions and speak for themselves because they have a voice, and really realizing that. With our young parents, we do work at Cope Center North, and we do a circle of mamas with Southern Birth Justice Network. That looks like covering topics on like breastfeeding, postpartum care, baby wrapping, midwifery and doula support. That looks like having open discussions with our young pregnant and parenting youth on everything from like postpartum depression to things they wish they need, to things they wish they had, and helping them organize and advocate for the things they need. So right now they have 4 weeks of maternity leave before they have to go back in school. A lot of them have said that that's not enough, and when they come back that they're overwhelmed with the amount of coursework that they receive, and the amount of coursework that they feel like they missed. So having online access to that, helping with transportation, having support with tutoring, and just in general. So we're really uplifting them in that and helping them to organize and advocate for their own rights. And then moving forward, how to expand that to include services in the community and linkage to those services, and enabling them to get supplies and other things they need moving forward.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to come to you, Wakumi, of Soul Sisters Leadership Collective, and talk to us a little bit about your work. We know that Soul Sisters has a powerful infusion of arts and justice, and also uses a circle process that really embeds the restorative justice strategy. And your organization is also lifting up the intersections of juvenile justice, education, and gender. So talk to us about that work. Yes.
Can I be heard better now? Jamie's is better? Is it better? Oh, there we go. There we go. I just want to start. For me, like right now in this moment, I'm feeling really full. It's been a really powerful day of conversations, and for folks on the live stream, you weren't able to see the gift. I'm feeling tearful. The gift that the young people offered us today, with the piece that they gave us, the theater piece that they gave us, describing the depth of their experiences with all these isms that we talk about, sometimes in a really heady way, but they were able to share it, the pain of it with us in a very embodied way. And so I'm just feeling really full and just wanting to just really honor the ancestors who are in the room with us, and all the power on this panel, and the spirit of speaking truth to power that's happening right now, in ways that I think are really unique. And gratitude to the Community for Just Schools Fund for providing this opportunity for us to do that. So I'm just feeling really grateful, and grateful for the land, for the Seminole and Miccosukee people who were here before us, and kept this land for us. And so I'm just in a space of feeling really full. And I've been trying to, when I'm asked to speak, share this research that just came out recently. Georgetown University put out this report called Girlhood Interrupted. And I like to share some of the findings from the report because they really shake me to the core of my being. And I hope that they do the same to others, to support people in moving around what it really means to center Black girls and what Black girls really need. And the report was looking at adults' perceptions of Black girls, what adults think about Black girls. And these are some of the key findings. I'm just going to read them from my phone. Black girls seem older than white girls of the same age. Black girls need less nurturing than white girls. Black girls need less protection than white girls. Black girls need to be supported less than white girls. Black girls need to be comforted less than white girls. Black girls are more independent than white girls. Black girls know more about adult topics than white girls. And Black girls know more about sex than white girls. Those are the perceptions that adults have of our girls. And I think about that often in the work that Soul Sisters is called to do, and the mandate that we have, that we're given by court-involved girls who were key players in the founding of this organization. This organization was founded in close collaboration with justice-involved youth. And so what I'm gonna bring to the conversation today is thinking about our girls who are under state surveillance, and our girls who are behind the walls in detention facilities, residential treatments run by corporate institutions that are making money off of their imprisonment and incarceration, and the surveillance of them. And I want to just raise some of the things that we're seeing in our work. So we work in detention facilities, day treatment facilities, and residential facilities here in South Florida and also in New York City. And we're seeing, I want to be careful to say that there are many adults in these facilities that are really well-intended, loving, caring individuals who care a lot about the young people in these places. So I want to name that first before I start talking about some of the challenges that we're observing. Because there are people in these places that are wrapping their loving arms around these young people and doing everything they can to support them in moving through this challenging experience of the court system and incarceration. And what we're noticing is there's a real struggle in many of these facilities, particularly the co-ed facilities, to center the unique needs that girls have. There was one facility that we used to go to every time we showed up there, me and Vicky. Every time we showed up there, they'd say, oh, here come the S.O.U.L sisters. When are we gonna get the S.O.U.L brothers? The boys need a group too. Why do the girls get a special group? And this was a school that was 80%, 85, 90% boys, right? Every group is a boys group. You know, every classroom is a classroom tailored to boys. Every space is a boys space. And really had to do a lot of work educating the staff around the importance of censoring girls' experience and carving out safe space for girls to fully express the authenticity of their femininity, to take down the armor that they're wearing when they walk into these facilities, that many of them, not all of them, but many of them are court-ordered to attend, to take down the armor they need to wear to deal with the sexual harassment, the threats of sexual violence they deal with on a daily basis, the fact that they know that they may be threatened with sexual violence, and when they go to a staff to report it, the staff member is ill-equipped to deal with it, doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the tools, hasn't been trained, whatever the case may be, isn't going to deal with it in a way that the young woman feels it needs to be dealt with. And then she's got to go back to school the next day and look at the boy who said the thing, whatever the thing was to her, and made her feel really unsafe. And so that's one thing that we're seeing in schools. Another thing that's happening, and those are schools, again, day treatment schools where many young people are court-ordered to attend. And so we're working really closely with, what's great is that we're working really closely with staff at these schools to really be able to carve out space for young people to get what they need, particularly girls, to get what they need. Another thing that we're hearing about but not seeing in the state of Florida is about residential facilities really being places that are really perpetuating the pipeline to prison. So there's a particular residential facility in a county in Florida, and there's a local organization that's doing some advocacy work around it, so I'm going to talk in more general terms as to not expose their strategy, because they haven't gone public with what they're doing yet. But there's a county in Florida where there's a residential facility that's right across the street from a prison, from a jail, from the county jail. And the residential treatment facility, again, is a place where kids, teenagers, are sentenced as a part of their court involvement for whatever mistake it is they made. It's a place where they're meant to be receiving therapeutic care for the issues that they're struggling with as identified by the court and all the people who are part of that process. At this residential treatment facility, the staff they have law enforcement status, which seems really strange to me, that a staff member at a residential care facility, a therapeutic facility, would have the status of law enforcement. But here's what happens when a person has law enforcement status, a care provider. If a youth who has been traumatized, as we know that many of the young people at this facility are, acts out in some way, which we're expecting, right? It's a therapeutic care facility, we're expecting acting out, or expecting young people to be going through the ups and downs of their emotional life, acts out in some way and like hits something, their care provider, that youth is then charged with assault on a law enforcement officer. And at this facility, because it's so strategically located right across the street from the jail, she is literally put in handcuffs from the therapeutic treatment facility and walked across the street to the county jail. So this is something that's happening in one of the counties in Florida. Black girls need less protection and less nurturing. They need to be comforted less, right? And so I wanted to name all of that and then say that there's some light because we have this thing called restorative justice that was gifted to us by the original inhabitants of this land. And we can use this tool for healing, We can use it for community building, we can use it for creating safe space, and we can use it to address harms that young people may have been a part of, right? But to address those harms in a way that doesn't disrupt the entire life and well-being of a young person. And that provides that nurturing and protection and comfort and care that we know our Black girls really deserve. And so I'll say that, and also want to say, just give kind of a shout out to our work that we have had in South Florida 3 trainings in restorative justice circle keeping with youth. And we are really focused on building, like, not the next generation, but like the now generation of young people who are going to keep circle, like Mason, who y'all will hear from soon, for healing and for addressing harms, and are really excited about coming systems partners, folks who are in public officials and folks who are in departments of justice, the departments of juvenile justice and in date schools and with the school board. We're really interested in partnering with folks to talk more about how we can really use this tool as a way to deal with the disproportionate minority contact that we know Miami-Dade County is having a problem with. That can deal with the school push out and the suspensions and expulsions that we know this county is having a problem with. How can we use this tool to help end that? And that's all I'll say.
Thank you. So Mason, we're going to come to you. And so we talked a little bit about restorative justice, and we know that for the Black Girls Matter Miami Coalition work, that is really the process, that circle process, dynamic circle process, led to the set of beautiful demands that Black Girls Matter Miami created. And I think we have those demands on the screen behind us. And so with these demands in mind, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the unique challenges facing non-binary youth and what demands are important to ensuring schools are safe and supportive for all students?
Hi. Hi. Okay, so once again, my name is Mason. I'm 19. I just started college. Being gender nonconforming, and then Black, and then femme presenting, and then trans can provide, and then queer. It can provide a couple of challenges walking through everyday life, and I would like to touch on 3 of them. The first is something kind of as simple as the bathroom. So I know for a lot of people, you know, when you go, like, especially when you're like really young, you go with your parents to the bathroom, and over time you realize which bathroom you want to go in. And for a lot of people, it's not a traumatic experience. It's just you go in, you do what you got to do, and then you get out, and then you're all on your way. Well, for me, it's not as, for me, and then a lot of other people, it's not as simple as that. I have to give myself a really good pep talk before I enter any sort of bathroom to raise the least amount of questions. I tend to enter the women's bathroom, but there's always that feeling in the back of my mind of, because I'm entering this bathroom, they're going to assume I'm a woman, they're going to assume this, that, and the other, and it could be really, really, like, not hurtful, but kind of hurtful on myself, and which ties into the demand of more gender-neutral bathrooms at my college, Miami-Dade College, shout out. There's this one cute stall, and all it says is all gender bathrooms. And my heart sung with joy, because now I could publicly use the restroom without having a mild panic attack. And I would like to see, especially during high school when it was just male and female, I'm just like, guess I'll just wait till I get home. It can be very comforting to see a bit more all gender or third gender bathrooms in schools, even if it is just a single stall for now. Another one I'd like to point out would be our gender expression and awareness. It's really funny growing up in a especially Baptist family who hated everyone that didn't look, act, or think like them. They often like to tell people, you're not your body, and you're so much more than that. But then the moment you tell them that your body doesn't match you, it's like, just kidding, you are only your body. Like, stop that. And it can get really upsetting because what we like to do, partly brain's fault, partly society's fault, what we like to do is put people into boxes. It's easier to label that way. So if we see someone who is in who's a designer? A Calvin Klein suit, and they have the short hair and they're very masculine looking. Our brain, because we're taught, if you look like this and you act like this, you're this. If we see this and we're just like, that's a man, and then we automatically assume that person is a man when that person could be literally everything other than a man. It can really, and I feel as though sometimes, especially with society, the darn society, it really restricts you from being your authentic self, cis or not, cis meaning like so cis or not, it can be just very restricting. I can't wear this shirt without someone asking like, are you trying to be a man? It's like, no, I just like this shirt. You know, it's like we don't allow ourselves to be comfortable in our own skin and changing up our body or changing up our looks without someone like just turning their evil eye and telling us how to live as if they have any right to do that. And the third one I'd like to point out, which was very important to me, was history, especially being Black in America. You're not entitled to a history, period. And one thing that I've received many a reply of would be that, oh, this thing just started on Tumblr. Like, this is an Instagram thing that's gonna phase away in like 5 months. Like, you never existed, stop it. And it's like, no. Anthropologists can tell you we've been here since the beginning of time. And especially before colonization of the entire world and like pre-imperialism, we were always here. And it's funny to me how a lot of humans, no matter where we are in the world, we tend to come up with the same conclusions. And one of the conclusions being that there's man, and then there's woman, and then there's literally everyone else in between and outside. And you have, for example, even now with the resurgence of claiming back our cultures, there has been a resurgence of hijras in India, which is like a third gender over there, or the concept very vaguely titled two-spirit in Native American culture for people who either live between men and women or outside men and women. And it's always been there, which ties into the man of wanting more educational resources, because a lot of people don't know that. And sometimes not knowing, and because you could look at someone and be like, why don't I feel like the way this person is? And it could be very like, well, like, because you can't, you know yourself better than anyone else. Like, you are you. No one can tell you how to be you except for you. So sometimes it can, if you're only presented with two options that you don't really agree with, it can be very challenging to be like, am I crazy? Am I this? Am I that? And it's like, no, you're fine. Here's the lovely word for you. And I think it's just very important for everyone to know our history and to be a bit more accepting, to know that the world is very, very, very diverse. There is literally no point into trying to put people down into boxes, because we are not, like the quote said, we are not single issue people. Like, we are very complex. Humans are very complex. So the complexities of our existence just shouldn't be picture-lapped a label and then strictly reinforced just because it's convenient. We need to be authentic and to be ourselves so that in the end, we're happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. So I'm going to ask a follow-up of the panel. And first, I'm so incredibly inspired, I know y'all are too, around the work that all of you are doing. One of the things that I always admire about the organizing that happens here in South Florida is that all of the organizations, all the individuals on this panel, in addition to organizing to fight back on policies that are harmful for young people, your organizations and all of you individually and through your work are lifting up the kind of vision that we want to see in the world. You're building new ways of being and existing in schools and for young people, and that is pretty powerful. And so with that in mind, as we think about the frame of this discussion, expanding our framework around school discipline, lifting up and looking at push out at those intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. What does, so holding that, and then thinking about our current conversations around safety. So Parkland has really reignited this conversation around what real school safety means. And so this question's really for all of you. So as we look at safety, if we were to truly look at safety through those intersections, what would that safety look like in our schools? What would that vision look like? And as you think about the organizing work of your organizations and the programmatic work of your organizations, what support do you need to help make that vision possible? So I'm going to first we're going to go down the row. So I'm going to go to you, Ruth.
Okay, so Ruth again. So I have had the pleasure to work with all of these organizations, which is also just an honor, but it's also been really dope to be able to see the different kind of programmatic work that people are doing, and also an opportunity to think of it as what are the ways that we can connect the dots, right? Like connect the dots and see how strategies could fit with one another. And so in the last month, we did a restorative justice training. So one of the things that I kind of like put myself out there to do is to Wakumi, myself, Hashim, a couple of people in this room have been trained on restorative justice circle keeping, which was intentional to be able to build our own capacity, to know why we're doing this and to utilize it within our organization. But it was also around capacity building, and building the capacity to have each organization utilize restorative justice. Like if we're gonna say, okay, we want restorative justice in schools, we want them in communities too, because the things that students are facing in schools is also, they're facing them at home too. And they're facing them within their own neighborhoods. And so to utilize restorative justice as that tool to say, okay, if we're having like a communal conversation or a family like altercation or whatever, like we've had youth utilize restorative justice as that tool, right? Like instead of just punching each other, hitting each other, like, okay, let's use a talking piece, right? But it does take that, like what James was sharing around that emotional intelligence piece, and which takes a lot of time, right? It takes a lot of time. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is because in the last couple of months, I've been really looking at the other aspect of advocacy, and which has been around care coordination and wraparound services. That like, I've seen families just living in their car. Like as an organizer, that wasn't my work for 10 years, right? We know this, we know that these are the issues that young people are facing, but to be able to like work with families where they don't have a place to live, they don't have a way to transport from themselves to school if they've moved. They don't have a midwife or a doula to support them to getting to the doctor or the midwife, and therefore they don't go, right? They don't get any prenatal care, right? And so I think when we're thinking about like ways to support, it's like one, building the capacity of these organizations to continue to utilize restorative justice tools, and to really think about what are the ways that we're impacting that student or that young person or that Black parent that comes to our organization holistically, right? So if that means working with organizations that do provide access to midwifery, or that provide access to housing or access to transportation, that's part of what we do. Like, it's not like, okay, these are the organizations over there, but that we are well equipped to basically see that person as like a spiritual being, meaning that we respect and see that person for themselves right then and there, right? Which then gives us the opportunity to see, okay, what is it that they need, and supporting them so that they can see that the reasons why they are out of housing or transportation, whatever, is because of systemic oppression, right? And so leadership development and political education is always gonna be part of what we do and what I see myself doing as we move forward. But I'm grateful and thankful that we're all here to have this conversation, and that's what I would add to that question.
Rachel?
So in 2014, I worked for an organization called the African American Policy Forum, and I had the opportunity to go across the country and host town halls where women and girls came out and told their stories, many of whom for the first time were sharing everything they've gone through in life. And I had the opportunity to come and help plan the one in Miami. And I think what was really powerful about that space was that just creating space for women and girls of color to be heard, like uninterrupted for hours, is just like, that's rare. That doesn't happen in this society, especially not in our schools. And to, you know, work with girls who had internalized what they've been through so much because they're socialized to think like, to internalize their problems, to not talk about sexual assault and many of the things that young girls are experiencing. They didn't even think, like when you ask them, like helping them develop their stories, they didn't even think of those as like things they've been through because they've been taught to hold it in so much. And so the act of like creating space for women and girls to tell their stories created this like floodgate. Like I remember at the one in Miami, like so many people from the community were coming to the stage and saying, I want to tell my story too. And so I think we need more spaces like that. We need more spaces for our children to be nurtured and seen as whole people, just as you're saying. And for schools to not be a site of further trauma, but to be a site of self-exploration and the healing that comes from that, and the community that comes from that as well. And so, you know, after, I mean, I guess just one way that we can, I think, support that is, you know, like Dream Defenders, after we've been through this town hall experience, we're so inspired by the space that had been created for women and girls that we decided within our organization to actually create a women's faction, which was basically a group of women in the organization who came together to really understand how we could create a more nurturing organization for women leaders. And many things came out of that experience, including the establishment of a restorative justice policy, like really using that internally to deal with harm in the organization, as well as like political clarity around, okay, if we're gonna be prison abolitionists, we're also going to be feminists. Because if we're gonna say we're not gonna have prisons, then we have to figure out how to deal with the violence that is so pervasive against women and girls in our community. And so I think in terms of what support looks like, figuring out how we can specifically support women's leadership and all that will come from that in terms of the healing that creates for women, the healing that creates for communities, and the possibility that creates in terms of this new world we're trying to build is super, super important. Because I think when I think about my feminism is about a world that is opposite of the patriarchy, which is a world based on punishment and domination and prisons. And so we need to nurture women's leadership in order to really build a new feminist society that is the exact opposite of this world we're living in today.
Absolutely. I know we have goosebumps from that comment. Thank you, Rachel. James, your take on that question.
So obviously when people think about safety talked about in the mainstream, the one thing is more police in schools and the role police play to keep people safe. And not only do we not believe that, but if you actually have circle where you sit down and just exchange stories with young people or even your peers, you know, and we like to just say, like, you know, if you didn't have to, you know, if you lived in a society where you didn't have to worry about money, you didn't have to, you know, have a job where everything was taken care of, like, what would you do? Like, how would you spend your time? And the first response is like, well, what do you mean? Like, we have to work, right? Or like, it's just, people can't process that question. But then when you continue to talk to them, the number one thing that makes people feel safe in this question, they're just like, well, I just want to make sure that my folks are good, right? I just want to make sure that, like, my family's not stressing, or that, like, we have everything that we need. And I think that is such a simple, basic human desire, is just for us to live and be able to be and not have to worry about the deficiencies that exist. And how those deficiencies cause all the problems with our family, all the problems with our community, like this scarcity mentality. And to just think about how that relates to sending young people into meetings with administrations around policy, around innovation, around things that can improve school climate, and they say, well, how are you going to pay for it, right? Or like, it's not in the budget. But then when moments like this happen, you know, the state legislature can take $600 million that essentially drop out of the sky for more police and more surveillance in schools. Or the local school district can think about a $30 million proposal that drops out of the sky, with a majority of it going to police and surveillance, automatic locked doors. And then even at the city level where, you know, the city doesn't have to give money to the school board, but hey, we'll give $22 million to make sure that there's City of Miami police officers to be in schools. And that just reflects a fundamentally different priority of what we need in this world between our community and the folks who are empowered. So for us, I mean, ultimately, I think safety means how can we switch school to be a place that prioritizes human development and over profit? And what you can do in the meantime, knowing that that educational system is kind of in crisis around this, is fund organizations like us to be able to provide the capacity to do the stopgap stuff until we figure that education piece out. But in the meantime, right, like, I'm sure everybody here would love to have additional staff members to do the exact same thing that we've been doing, right? To organize our communities, but then to also be able to spend more time telling stories, exchanging deep relationships and authentic relationships with the folks in our communities that we're in contact with.
Thank you, James. For you, Samantha.
Yes, safety. So when I heard this, I thought about conversations that I've had with young people. Safety looks like to them and to me being able to go to your school and not be sexually harassed, being able to walk down the street and not be catcalled, being able to actually learn in the environment and not worry about being suspended, or if you are suspended, being out of the classroom. I think safety goes hand in hand, and I think circles are a great way to develop reproductive justice and to move reproductive justice forward. I think that an experience that I had that fundamentally changed my life was a circle, a healing and a celebration circle, and it drastically changed how I viewed the world and how I do this work. So I think that circle keeping is essential and crucial. I think that we need to change the way we look at safety. We need to look at our young people and ask them their experiences and what makes them feel safe. Safety for them that they've told me is being able to get my education, right? Being able to get your education, being able to not be sexually harassed, like I said, and then building organizations like all of the ones on this panel, right? Building our capacity to develop our young people, right? So they can be the champions. They can be their own champions. They know what they need, and we need to trust that, right? It's not just this moment where they're highlighting youth organizing like it just started happening. It's been happening, right? All our Black and brown youth have been saying these things are happening in my school, and my experience is this, and I don't feel safe, or these shootings are happening and have been happening outside my school and in my communities on a daily basis. So I think that building our capacity, really investing in restorative justice, recognizing the strong ties in restorative justice as a way to build reproductive justice and move it forward is essential.
Thank you. Wakumi?
Yeah, I just, everything that's already been, by the time it gets to me, it's like, check, yes. But I think the thing that I just want to highlight is the incredible importance of allowing young people to address harms directly that are happening to them. They need to be able to to sit across the person who hit them yesterday and be like, you hit me yesterday, and that was awful, and why did you do that? And how are we going to move forward in a good way? They need to be able to do that. And what's happening in schools right now, as we all know, is young people hit each other, and then they get the finger wag, and they get suspended, and they come back to school, and everything's the same. Nothing has changed about their relationship dynamic. Nothing has changed about the thing that caused them to be fighting to begin with. Nothing has been repaired. The relationship hasn't been, it just hasn't been repaired. And so I think and this is something that I learned today from one of the sisters in the theater piece, is, you know, when she, and we know this, when she got into a fight with someone, they walked her into a room with a table just like this, and she sat on one side, and the person sat on the other side, and the teacher, whoever, the administrator sat on the top and told them all the things that they needed to do and how they needed to make it right and what were they going to do, and they were to shake hands and that be that. But that's not that's not real life, right? And where are the spaces for young people to make mistakes and to explore, like Rachel was saying, and really be able to directly address the harms. And they are capable of doing this. I think for some reason people think young people are not capable of doing this. And I think people also think that these things don't work or something. It's like kumbaya or something. People think it's like woo-woo. I don't know what people think. But like it actually, like the truth is, circle works. Yeah. People work it out in circle. They work out the pain and the hardship and the drama. They work it out in circle. It works. And so I just can't, that's like key. And then I think for how we can support at least the work that S.O.U.L Sisters is doing inside the site-based work we're doing in detention facilities, residential facilities, and day treatment schools for girls who are justice involved, we need folks in those spaces to prioritize the space. Just like Rachel was saying, we need the space for girls to be able to authentically and freely express themselves, to be safe and to be prioritized. One thing that we sometimes face is because these schools are dealing with Department of Juvenile Justice requirements, they may have a mandated group that they have to do that will just take the place of where our group was. So we would have been having a girls group on a Wednesday for 9 months, and then they'll get a directive from a government agency that says they have to do anger regression something or something else, something evidence-based, and they'll say, we can't have the girls group anymore because we have to do this thing. And then the girls just don't get their group. And so we really need, and we have to think really creatively, like during lunch or like during life skills, right, Stas? All of these, we have to think about all these ways to get it in. We need the space carved out. The girls need it. And so whoever the movers and shakers are who are listening to this, create the space for the girls. And then the last thing I'll say is like everyone else said, but I'm just gonna say it more plainly, we need money, we need money, we need checks. If there's anybody who's listening to this out there in the world or in the audience who wants to write checks, I feel like we would all welcome some checks. Because we're doing, I know at least for S.O.U.L Sisters, we're doing this work on a shoestring budget with a really small shop and having actual real impact on young people's lives. And so what would our impact look like if we had the actual money? If we had the money that the police had, who are not having a good impact on kids, what would that look like if we had the $600 million to split amongst our 3 organizations, right? So and I want to shout out the grant makers for Girls of Color work. That's being led by folks at Novo Foundation. There are grant makers who are organizing themselves to prioritize funneling resources to folks who are doing work focused on girls of color. And that work is being led by Black women. And so like Black women are doing work to get resources to our organizations, and I want to highlight that work, and we need more of that.
Awesome, thank you. And Mason.
So safety and support. Well, to me, I feel as though the elephant in the room, less guns, would be nice. Guns are a logical fallacy. They're made to hunt and kill, and maim, and do all sorts of harms. I don't see why we need more of them if we're trying to do less harm. Right. I would also, safety to me is not having to pray to whatever I want to pray to be like, let my friends be safe in their high schools, and wonder like, is this the day they're gonna get shot up? You know, like, come on, guys. Or and safety is knowing that my 5-year-old nephew is gonna come back alive, you know, since they're shooting up 5-year-olds too. So I'd like to know that, you know, safety, especially in schools where you're supposed to learn and grow as a person, to know that it's under attack so severely in this country is very, very heartbreaking. Some support, more money in counselors. that actually counsel, not the let me fix your schedule, except I'm not really going to fix your schedule counselors. I'm talking about like the people who talk to you, tell you about the hotlines that they have, and like all the good things for, because you know, your mental psyche is very, very, very important, and I don't understand why there's not enough like importance on it. So if you're not, because if you're not doing well up in your psyche, it can really affect how you live. So I think it's very important, especially at a time where like hormones and your body is doing all sorts of crazy things. I think it's very important to have that. Support would be seeing more adults understand that, you know, the time in which they grew up in is not the same time in which I'm growing up in, and it's also not the same time in which the next generation is going to grow up in, because times do change rather rapidly, and for there to be a sake of understanding between the generations, rather than adults being like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're like under 20, you didn't even live, and it's just like, I'm not a baby, I have my own brain, I can make my own decisions, I'd like guidance to it, yeah, but like a bit more humanity would also be nice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now I believe we're going to turn to questions, and we'll take questions both online. We have one already queued up, and then we'll also take questions in the room. One thing that's important for questions in the room, I think we want to make sure we can have a mic available to you if you do have a question. But we're going to go to the first one now from online, and this is from Mariana from S.O.U.L Foundation. And her question is, when decision makers aren't responsive to your policy recommendations or don't accept your invite to receive gifts of your direction and guidance, how do you strategize around being effectively heard or engaged? So we can popcorn that. Would anyone feel compelled to address that question first?
Yeah, I could go. Shoot. Let me tell you. So this very thing happened because Pari's been doing this, trying to move this campaign of restorative justice 10 years. It's finally in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, but it really took us re-strategizing and working with the teachers union, working with social service organizations that had like a level of influence to not just, so our target was like the superintendent, right? Because he has the decision-making power, but then what we learned was like the deputy superintendent actually is the one that operationalizes it. And so having like it really took a lot of like organizing with groups that we normally probably wouldn't be organizing with to basically kind of get them to like talk to the deputy superintendent. That was something that was like really clear. It's not easy. It was like a lot of negotiations, which I think for a direct action organization, we did a lot of, but that was one way that we were like, all right, this is it. This is the way, this is kind of like the opening to this like really large infrastructure in Miami-Dade. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Samantha?
Yeah, I will piggyback off what Ruth was discussing because it's something that I feel like I'm doing and we're doing right now when we're talking about comprehensive sex education, really getting those that believe in it and have a stake in it, like teachers, like healthcare providers, like community members and parents that really do want this for their youth and for their young people, and seeing that that's overwhelmingly the majority of us, building community together and building our base that way. So that like the school board and other individuals can't ignore it, right? So when I spoke, like I said before, they just looked at me blankly. They can't look at 500 of us when we fill up the school board blankly, right? So making sure that that's something that we continue to do and using that in multiple strategies when we're talking about the school to prison pipeline and when we're talking about infrastructure, money being funneled for more police in schools and infrastructure, right? So bulletproof glass and automatic locked doors, and realizing that all of these things are harming our young people, and all of these things are a part of reproductive justice and restorative justice.
Just one thing to add real quick. So I know that call, I think, came from Boston. We're in Florida. like totally different. Like we've had trifecta Republican control of this state, so the governorship, the Senate, and the House for the past 20 years. And so we don't, like, it's really rare that we actually have a politician in office who actually has our interests in mind at all. And if they do, they lack the political power to be able to move our interests. And so all the organizations at this table are part of an effort called the Statewide Alignment Group, which is building a 10-year plus plan to actually flip the state. Because we know that we actually need our people in office in order to be able to actually be able to move any sort of agenda, both locally and statewide. And so we're really, really hopeful about that effort, which begins with this year. Rights restoration is on the ballot. Florida is one of 3 states where if you have a felony, you can't vote. So 1 in 2 black men and 1 in 4 black people in this state cannot vote. So that's a huge barrier to even being able to flip the state or get people elected. And so if we're able to overturn that this year, it will re-enfranchise 1.6 million people, which will completely shift our ability to impact elections.
And then I would just add one thing to this conversation also, and just sometimes you have to start small. So sometimes if there's we have a big ask and we get a no, sometimes it's about finding the ally that we have and working with that ally to grow what it is we want to do. So I'm thinking about that particularly in terms of restorative justice, and restorative justice as a diversion approach for in the juvenile justice system, that there are a couple of allies in a couple of places. And we're working to really build with those folks, and then see when it makes sense for us to start a pilot, study that pilot, make sure it works, and then we can talk about what expansion looks like. So I think in a place like Florida where there isn't sort of like automatic co-signing onto these ideas, sometimes it's about finding an ally and really working that relationship and getting everything we can get out of it, and then proving that what we did was useful and effective, oftentimes in ways that are about money, right? So that we can move our agenda forward.
Thank you. All right, we'll turn to our in-person audience here for a question. Go ahead, Hashim.
Hi everyone. Hashim Benford with the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing. And my question comes back to the piece around resources, talking about checks, and this is a funder briefing. So one of the things that I love about the work down here, and that is represented with you beautiful people, is that you're really representing the work of trying to build holistic movement, where you're holding different pieces within that. So you have groups that are thinking really specifically about organizing and the kind of leadership development that goes with that and power building, but also what are the alternatives that we need to build? How do we work within the existing systems and provide the services that our young people need now? And I know from being in ED before being in this role that it's often hard to raise funding for that kind of strategy because funding sources themselves often kind of reinforce the silos. So I'm curious if you were to be able to kind of like draw a picture of your ideal funding ecosystem, like what would you ask of the funders out there? How would you ask them to support your work, both in terms of the collaborations that you're trying to build, but also like what do you need for your organization to be able to both focus on its priority and also not get pigeonholed into that priority? You can take a minute to think about that.
Powerful question. Who wants to take it first?
I would say, so one, when we're thinking about like measurables or objectives, if we need to have a long-term strategy to flip things, then funders also need to have a long-term way of thinking about the steps that we're going to make around like performance, around measurables and things like that. And then so extending the timeline it takes for us to actually get to doing what we're supposed to be doing. But then also in terms of trying to build an ecology, how can we shift some of the conversations around, okay, we'll give you funding for this particular program or this particular line item of this disciplinary policy, and actually expand that to say, how can we fund, like what is it going to take to actually build this ecology, and how can we fund what you're really good at, and how can we support you from there, in a way that creates incentive for our organizations to begin thinking more clearly collectively.
I'll jump in. So I think, thank you for the question. Something that came to me is around that we all know that these nonprofits aren't going to be forever. That we have them now, thank God, right? But that we're not going to have them forever. And the reason why I say that is because things always change. Like it may be created to something different. But what we have now is individual people with individual issues that they're dealing with that we hope to grow to build the masses to basically tip that, right? To be able to have a feminist society, right? Which is going to happen, right? And so for me, I think in building this new project with FemSage, when I was explaining to you all that, so midwives, right, catch babies. I'm a doula, I'm a midwife in training, but I'm also an organizer and a mama, right? And to be able to catch a community, to nurture that community, to even when you think of a plant, you're watering that plant, you're watering that community. Think of it that way, right? When you have a young person and you have somebody in your community that you're developing, and you're developing them politically, you're developing them just holistically, that spiritual wellness is also part of that. And building alternatives, so restorative justice is one alternative that we've been really good at, right? And building the alternative of like, if we want birth justice in schools, then we're gonna train people and provide resources so that they can go become doulas, or that they themselves would become midwives, or that will provide resources for people to be able to take care and know what comprehensive sex ed looks like for themselves in their own bodies. And the trainer model, that knowing that individuals, like if we're gonna be about restorative justice, then we're gonna train people, and that we're gonna really make it so that there's like a group of people who support it, that they're just not trained, but that they are literally supported in that skill, and that they're honing in, so that way maybe there's a next round of people that can train other people. And building those alternative for the fact that like we know these organizations aren't gonna exist, but generations will continue to come and move forward. And what are the tools that we're giving to them?
Okay, we have a question from online. Oh, time. All right. Okay, are we wrapping? Okay, well, join me. First of all, thank you, fabulous panelists. Thank you so much. This is a powerful conversation, and we really appreciate your questions. And if you are still brewing with your questions, please reach out to these organizations. I believe we have the contact information behind us, and we can also make that a resource packet available with contact information following this briefing, in case you'd like to get in touch with folks. But all of these organizations are accessible online, on Twitter. You should be able to go to their websites and get their emails. And then we're also at Communities for Just Schools Fund happy to put folks in touch with anyone here on our panel today. So again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And we will see you on the front lines of justice. Thank you.